So I was seeing this podcast from Orient Taraban on Diary of a CEO, and I thought it was quite an interesting discussion that they were having, and I wanted to share some thoughts with regards to what they were discussing on the podcast, specifically on dating apps. There were some really good points that Orion brought up with regards to whether or not dating apps are a net positive or like a net or a net negative to society, and whether we're moving in the right direction with marketing ourselves on dating apps, which in the grand scheme of things, largely favor women, although many men don't initially realize this because they're so hungry, they're so desperate for sex, for connection, for intimacy, that certain truths which are so visible in plain sight get essentially lost in the confusion of it all. Let's put it that way. Um, but that's the question, right? Are dating apps a net positive to society? Well, what I can tell you for certain is, from my experience, dating apps, specifically Tinder, Hinge, Bumble, the whole bit, right? They're largely beneficial to beautiful people, right? So, the upper 10% of men, for instance, who, get 90% of the women. And of course, women get, a horde of men on these dating apps qualifying themselves, relentlessly most of the time to um, to get some, right, to sleep around, and it's very casual. I mean, it's not really a matter of building connection, and going through all the seduction stages and really um, pursuing in the classical sense. It's very shallow. It's very non-traditional. It's quite unconventional, if anything. However, it's the norm, right? It's what we know. It's what's common. Um, but is it a net positive to society? Well, this largely depends on where you fall on the attraction scale and what your core values are. And by core values, I mean, what do you ultimately value? Is it a traditional relationship? Is it more, pursuing some kind of degeneracy, hedonism of some sort? Or do you want to build something long term? Because ultimately, from all the men I've spoke to, most men still at the end of it all, feel a certain emptiness, right? That comes up, a certain void which is very hard to fill, of course, from casual sex, which is the main function or the most overpowering one when you're going on these dating apps, um, which are very female oriented, as I said, but also on top of that, it's a trap. Um, it's very much a trap, because you see these women, and these men, they choose the best pictures. There's all these thirst traps, and men, who are not otherwise attractive are trying to take high quality photos of themselves, and they're going on photo shoots, and the whole bit. And what many men tend to find out at the end of it is that just marketing yourself on these apps is not sufficient to, you know, if you're hungry, let's say, if you're very sexually deprived and you're trying to get out there, it's not really conducive to having some kind of success with women. And actually most men, 80-90% of men have very little success with women, right? Whereas the upper 10%, be it if they're tall, handsome, strong, uh, they're plowing through women, like there's no tomorrow in some cases. And why is that, right? What why is it there's like such a large disparity between both extremes, and when I say that dating apps are, catered towards beautiful people, I just mean that more specifically for men, because you have women who are otherwise, you know, of average attractiveness, let's say, who, are sleeping with, otherwise very high value, attractive men, or are perceived as high value, let's put it that way. Um, so what would be my suggestion to men who are of average attractiveness, which, that includes probably 80% of men, let's say? You have to market yourself beyond dating apps. You have to get yourself out there. It's a numbers game, for men. It's not a matter of quality. It's not a matter of choosing, the right woman if you're not even having some degree of success with women to begin with. You need to first build up the confidence and the self-possession, to have the right mentality to to be able to know how to seduce, but also to have some degree of game. And by game, I mean just knowing how to speak to women and having a degree of authority or influence, whatever way you want to put it, um, over yourself, and also an understanding of how female communication actually works, because we tend to conflate those two differences. We make the assumption that we're, you know, women think in the same way and feel in the same way as men do, which is, it's such a common misconception nowadays with all the equality and um, egalitarianism, which we see very eminently in culture, especially in the West, namely. So you need to build the foundations, and it's very much a numbers game, especially if you're average. You can't really, wait for the right moment and then strike, and then, you don't even know how to speak to women, or you have no charisma at all. You don't even know how to be charming. So you need to first understand by putting in the work. You will figure it out through taking action, even if you've never read anything, of value on how women actually work, or what women actually respond to in a conversation and all that. Um, Men who usually take the risk and put themselves out there usually figure that out as they go. However, most men never actually take the risk. They never really put themselves out there. You see? So if you don't expose yourself to some kind of bravery, going up to speaking to women, if you have, for example, approach anxiety or something, you're never going to understand the implications of this intersexual game which is being played, whether you recognize it or not. You have to build the reps outside of online dating. Online dating is often, in some cases, a cop out for men who are very insecure. They have no sense of self confidence, they don't have much going for them in their personal life. because they're very much absorbed by a certain lust, and what I have seen at least is that when a man gets his, his the stuff he can control in place, be it his sense of style, he builds up on himself, a solid physique, he has a good job, just, the basic qualities of a responsible man, essentially, who is not wasting his time in idleness and laziness, and has a certain direction. What I have seen with those men is that the woman part, in due course, right, tends to resolve itself. Um, you have to realize as well that actually before the age of 25, for most men, their prefrontal cortex is not even fully developed. And that also includes their social abilities, right? Their social skills. Because let me put it straight, and I have to be honest with you, it is people skills. Knowing how to speak to women is actually no different than, learning sales, really. There is absolutely no difference between knowing how to sell and speaking to women, or having the ability, shall you want to seduce a woman, or have her fall in love with you, um, for mutual benefit, that is. The basic principles of sales, of business, of strategy, of war, right? Those translate very, very accurately to the intersexual world, be it persuasion, appealing to self interest, knowing how to gauge emotions, reading body language, the ability to carry yourself in a certain way, reading social cues, being able to have compelling spectacles, the art of surprise and unpredictability, spontaneity, all that. The very principles that you would apply to sales, the discovery stage, for instance, of a sales call, what you do basically when you meet a woman for the first time. You're asking questions. You're not overly speaking about yourself, which is another um, another mistake most men make when going on a date. They speak boringly about themselves for hours instead of redirecting their attention to the woman they're speaking to. They overshare. They say too much about themselves without actually taking the time to listen, which is a high value trait, by the way. To be a good listener is a virtue, not only with women actually. It's a virtue in itself, in every other facet of life. So when you see how those building blocks which you would have in sales, how they automatically translate to your own relationships, relationship building is a core aspect of sales as well. It is the human and sexual element of relationships, of intimate relationships, that largely differentiate them from strategic relationships in business, for instance. So that's an important differentiation to understand, because when you make the realization that sales is no different than business, than intersexual relationships, that is, that's a key insight. It's a clue, let's say, that we were made to believe that women are very complicated. That there's, there's a certain enigma about them, certain bewilderment, But desire, the nature of desire, as we understand it, right, is that you can't really bargain for it. Attraction has no morality. It literally has no morality to it. It's something. It's an inner feeling. And how is that triggered? How is that incited in a woman? Well, it's obviously a game of appearances as well. You need to know how to present yourself in a way which not only which makes you look masculine, but also which communicates to the woman that this man is on top of his business, right? He has his act together, essentially. Now, if you're, for example, socially awkward, you have all of that sorted, right? And it's a matter of being socially awkward because this is highly contextual, right? Then it's more of a matter of knowing how to speak to women, having the charisma, which is more complicated realistically than many people believe initially. There is a certain strategic aspect to it, which doesn't have to be dishonest, by the way. It can be direct and transparent. However, if you kill a certain element of mystery to it, it all crumbles because ultimately this is a conversation about love as well and romance. And you can't sustain romance in the long term without having a degree of playfulness, aloofness, mystery, which what does that do? One of the most powerful aspects of the female, of a woman, is her imagination, right? Is she's filling those empty gaps and she's fueling them with emotion, essentially. She's assigning certain meanings to gestures, to suggestions, to certain innuendos maybe that you are putting out there. And the result of that is she's building a fantasy around you. However, a common mistake men make is that they completely ruin that fantasy in the first, few months. Sometimes even the first few days, because they divulge everything about themselves. They leave no empty gaps for her to fantasize about or to explore. You see, so you have to know how to gauge desire and give her something to chew on. Now, this doesn't mean that you should become a manipulative prick and who has no sense of moral sense, moral value outside of the scope of women, of pursuing women. I don't believe that's right either. However, you need to have you need to understand the mechanics, the ins and outs of what drives women, what they respond to when a man who's interested in them behaves a certain way. Because you could do exactly the same thing. You could say it in exactly the same way. And if one man is more attractive than another, of course, the outcome could be extremely different because appearances play a very, very crucial role, more than maybe some of us anticipate. So once you get your appearance straightened out, the best thing you could do for yourself if you're not successful with women and you've never been, and you have a lack of charisma, the best thing you could do is learn how to speak to women. And you learn how to speak to women by putting in the reps. Unless you have access to a mentor or to someone who can shortcut the process for you. However, the idea of putting yourself out there and exposing yourself to the possibility of rejection, that really intimidates most men to the point of paralysis most of the time. So, a lot of men need someone to hold them accountable and put a wall against their back and get them to act sooner rather than later. Especially when it comes to approaching women, for instance. But those are a few thoughts. I don't want to continue on with the rant, but um, if you haven't watched that podcast, you should definitely check it out. It's extremely insightful and it sheds light on some of the crisis which we are experiencing at the moment, especially in dating and um, you know everything around that, how things are changing so drastically and rapidly as well. So, anyways, I hope you took some input from that, and let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see if I can um, share some input on that in some of the later videos which I will be publishing here. So have a great day and take care.